Good afternoon, and welcome to FIU's 7th annual Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony. I'm Orrin Steer, Professor of Religious Studies and Director of the Holocaust and Genocide Studies program in the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs. And it's my honor to MC today's observance on behalf of our program, Hillel at FIU, and the Jewish Museum of Florida-FIU. The FIU Holocaust and Genocide Studies program facilitates teaching and learning about the Holocaust and other genocides for FIU students, faculty, and community members on and off campus through new and enhanced course offerings, a professional certificate program, teacher training, community outreach, a library guide, and more, including our annual Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Week, which concludes tomorrow. Holocaust and genocide awareness, including education about anti-Semitism and hate speech, are not merely historical relics. Just this morning, I learned that a school board in Tennessee unanimously banned the Holocaust biography and memoir Maus due to its language and images. We have a lot of work to do. Less than 2 weeks ago in Colleyville, Texas, when a British gunman took a rabbi and 3 congregants hostage during Shabbat services, demanding the release of a convicted terrorist, an initial FBI statement said, astonishingly, that the crisis was not specifically related to the Jewish community. Though soon corrected, this misunderstanding speaks to the ongoing challenges in calling out varieties of anti-Semitism when and where they occur. We have a lot of work to do. As Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker said in an interview, there was no doubt that anti-Semitic conspiracy theories drove the hostage takers' actions. And I'm quoting, "This was somebody who literally thought that Jews control the world," Citron Walker said. "He thought he could come into a synagogue and we could get on the phone with the chief rabbi of America and he would get what he needed." We have a lot of work to do. This entire week of commemoration and education, therefore, serves as a call to civic engagement and awareness. It's our hope that today's event and our keynote speakers will inspire everyone to reflection and action. On your seats, you'll find stickers, each one naming a different individual who perished during the Holocaust. Please take one and remember. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the presence today of Interim President Kenneth Jessel. And I'd also like to thank some of the organizations and individuals who made today's commemoration and the entire week of events bracketing it possible. A complete list of co-sponsors is on the Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Week webpage, but I want to specifically recognize John Warwick, Executive Director of Hillel at FIU, as well as Assistant Director Olga Zeldsberg-Alterman and Springboard Fellow Naomi Balaban. And I want to recognize Susan Gladstone Pasternak, Director of the Jewish Museum of Florida-FIU, along with members of her team, Nancy Cohen, Luna Goldberg, and Katie Campana. Their tireless efforts for the past few months planning this week have produced a phenomenal series of programs. For today's remembrance ceremony, I want to thank Jenny P. Rivera, Director of Events in the Office of University Ceremonies and Events, and her team, including Melanie Rodriguez and Nicole Hoyle, for thinking of every detail, and Aixa Vecino and the rest of the Graham Center staff for their work. I'd also like to thank the co-sponsors of today's program, the Office of the President, the Honors College, and I recognize Dean J.C. Espinosa, the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs, the Dorothea Green Lecture Series, and the Department of Politics and International Relations. A very special shout out to my colleague, Professor Astrid Araras, for bringing her entire political violence and revolution class to today's event. Finally, I want to express my gratitude and admiration for Karmela and Joel Waldman, our keynote speakers, for their dedication to Holocaust education and awareness. And now, please welcome Victoria David, Hillel student leader, TAK president and MA candidate in the Department of Religious Studies.
Today, January 27th, is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, established in 2005 by the United Nations to mark the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz in 1945, and to serve as the worldwide date to commemorate the victims of Nazism and to promote Holocaust education. Just last week, we saw the 80th anniversary of the Wannsee Conference, the gathering on January 20th, 1942, in a lakeside villa on the outskirts of Berlin, where 15 Nazi party leaders and government officials sipped tea around a conference table over a period of 90 minutes and organized the final solution to the so-called Jewish question. Though genocide had already begun and the German invasion of the Soviet Union through the Soviet Though genocide had already begun in the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, these bureaucrats, over half of them with doctoral degrees in German universities, were meeting to coordinate their efforts to achieve mass murder with maximum efficiency. With maps and tables shown the estimated Jewish population of 34 countries, including UK and neutral countries, targeted for annihilation, 11 million Jews were to be eliminated. Now more than ever, this education is sorely needed, as anti-Semitism is not a concept of the past. Hate crimes are on the rise, and sinister conspiracy theories continue to blossom unchecked throughout social media, sowing seeds of suspicion and divisions across our communities. Anti-Semitism should and can no longer be ignored. I learned this very quickly when a group of students Nazi saluted a poster of Einstein in this very building and laughed at me. I learned this very quickly when 11 individuals were killed in my second home neighborhood of Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. These instances of anti-Semitism are not situational, nor are they far and few. It's a regular day occurrence, as we saw a little less than 2 weeks ago with the hostage situation in Beth Israel in Texas, and just last weekend, the anti-Semitic flyers that were passed out in Miami Beach. We can no longer, nor should we no longer, be silent about it. In a school as large as FIU, I believe that it's important to find community on campus. Growth as a student not only comes from what's inside the classroom, but from the experiences and friends we make along the way. As one student of 57,000, I found my FIU connection through the Jewish community on campus and my Department of Religious Studies. As a student leader with Hillel at FIU, and president of Theta Alpha Kappa, the Religious Studies Honor Society, I went from educating myself on Jewish history and culture to educating others. I went from making friends to forming a community. And I went from thinking I was just one out of 57,000 to understanding that my one voice matters, and I can speak out against hatred, and I can stand up for injustices of all kinds, and I can make a difference. There is strength in numbers, but there's also power in one. And my hope is that everyone here leaves today with not just a greater understanding of the atrocities that happened in the Holocaust, but with the courage to be the voice, even when you are the only voice. Now, I'd like to introduce Interim President Kevin Steffel, who will deliver a message to our students to signify the importance of today.
Thank you so much, Vicki, for being a voice, a strong voice, and one of many, many voices. There is a tremendous amount of work still to be done. You did a great job. Very proud of you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on campus and on Zoom for International Holocaust Remembrance Day, commemorating the millions of victims of the Holocaust. Today celebrates the 77th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp in Nazi-occupied Poland by the Red Army in 1945. For those of you who do not know me, I am Ken Jessel, the interim president of FIU, this great university. I've been at FIU for 13 years as the Chief Financial Officer and Senior Vice President for Finance and Administration. Today, I humbly join all of you as we gather to honor the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust and pay tribute to the strength and resilience of all those who survived. Here at FIU, we stand firmly against hatred, intolerance, and anti-Semitism, and remain committed to fostering a campus environment that is inclusive, tolerant, and peaceful. We also provide our students in the greater South Florida community with learning opportunities about the Holocaust, including a unit dedicated to the subject, FIU's Holocaust and Genocide Studies program. Today, as we continue to remember the lives that were lost during the Holocaust, I had the honor of introducing two individuals who can give us a personal look at that dark moment in history and how it has impacted generations that followed. With us is a Holocaust survivor and her son. Karmela Waldman was born in 1939 in Subotica, Yugoslavia. She faced imminent danger at just 4 years of age when Nazis showed up at her home and took her father, Lotzi Chris Harbor. Karmela was forced to flee with her mother, running through a hole in her backyard fence. She and her mother were separated shortly after. Hidden inside a Catholic school for several months, Karmela was eventually reunited with her mother after the Russian liberation of Belgrade, only to find that her father and other members of her family were among the countless victims killed in Auschwitz. Karmela remained in her hometown, but it didn't feel quite like home. The Jewish population of Subotica shrunk from 8,000 pre-war to only 80 post-war, 8,000 to 80. Despite the terrors Karmela faced, she continued with her studies at the University of Geneva, where she met medical student Roy, who would later become her husband of 60 years and counting. In 1969, Karmela earned her master's degree in social work and practiced as a licensed marriage therapist for nearly 40 years. Today, she co-hosts Surviving the Survivor podcast along with her son, Joel, who also joins us today. Joel Waldman is an Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist who brings more than 2 decades of experience crafting stories, including long-form documentaries, investigative reports, and human interest pieces. Joel was recently a DC-based Fox News network correspondent covering the complex world of national politics from Capitol Hill. Together, Karmela and Joel are pushing the boundaries with their podcast, Surviving the Survivor, shedding light on real-world issues and current events. It is truly an honor to have both of them here today. Please join me in welcoming Karmela and Joel Waldman.
For you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming here. I'll take the lead, right, Karmela? We are pushing boundaries on the podcast during most episodes. Yesterday we had, except for maybe yesterday, when we had Carol Baskin from Tiger King on. So we don't push the boundaries that hard, but she was an interesting guest nevertheless. So Karmela's one, and she gives me about 37 pieces of advice a day. And she said to me, Joel, we're going to talk at this Holocaust memorial. It is a solemn occasion. Do not make a joke. So I will, of course, start with a joke. The joke is, what is the difference between my beautiful mother, Karmela, and God? And the answer is, God does not know everything. So that is my mother. I knew we were coming to a Jewish event for sure when my mother said, "Are you sure this is the right Graham Center?" As though there would be another Graham Center on campus. And Mr. Dr. Steer called and said, "Are you going to FIU's main campus?" So I knew I was in good hands. I knew I was talking to a very broad audience, but with a little bit of a Jewish bent there. So without further ado, the way I'd like to do this, since I'm a journalist myself, is kind of do an interview. I know we're limited on time with my mother, and I prepared some questions. I just want to point out that I am a broadcast journalist for over 2 decades. And the day that the Surfside building collapsed here, CBS locally called me in. So I've been working locally with CBS. And as recently as this week, I was sadly covering anti-Semitism. I was in Fort Lauderdale. It turns out that flyers, these anti-Semitic flyers that I'm sure you heard about, were delivered to Surfside in Miami Beach, but afterward as well, they were found both in Fort Lauderdale and North Miami. So as Dr. Steer so eloquently points out, there is much work to be done. And one of the interesting things in speaking to Carol Baskin yesterday of Tiger King fame is that my mother and her in talking came up with this bizarre but accurate analogy that both tigers and Holocaust survivors are now rare species that need to be treated
Ready to be extinguished.
that need to be treated with respect. So,
But one thing you didn't say is
Yeah.
that we are going to try to leave a little time for people to ask
Sure.
questions.
so that's another thing. My mother said, "I'm sure the FIU students will have better questions than you," and so we will definitely leave time for that. But I've got some questions here, some notes. But so, Carm, I was thinking about this. We were talking about this periodically before coming here, and what's strange is that I'm now 52 years old, and my mother is not a person who languishes in anything. So this didn't even really come up in our lives. Discussion about this didn't really come up until I was out of college, to be honest. It wasn't really talked about. It was something that my mother didn't want to dwell on. And then I started to ask a lot of questions. And obviously, as we've gone on, I've learned a lot more. But one thing I didn't even realize till we were talking about this yesterday is they say that life is a game of inches. And my grandfather, who I never met, really missed a chance at life by 6 months. That's when he was taken to Auschwitz. So
They liberated us very shortly after they took him and everybody from Subotica. After they took us, or took them, not me, then very shortly after that, a few months later, the town was liberated by the Russians.
she's already getting ahead of me here. So one of the things that I've never asked my mother, and I try to elicit emotion in my interviews. So if all goes well, she won't get emotional now because she doesn't want to do it in front of you. But have you ever thanked your mother, who's no longer with us, for saving you?
Well, I'll give you just a very brief background. We were living in this small town right on the border between Yugoslavia at that time. I was born when it was still Yugoslavia, then it became Hungary. And my father, I had also a stepfather, and my father was studying in Germany before World War II. He was an optometrist. He learned how to chisel lenses for eyeglasses. So my mother obtained some false documents from relatives in Budapest to disappear and go up to Budapest because it was a big city and we could kind of blend in and get lost, because in this small town, everybody knew us. But my natural father said, I don't want you to go. I studied in Germany. They are highly civilized people, and you have nothing to fear. Worse than they will take us to concentration camps. No, he didn't think they could kill us at that time. But the morning they came to take us, my father turned to my mother and grandmother, and he said, because they were living together in the ghetto, and he said, please do something. My mother's name was Vera. Please, Vera, do something, save her. And my mother took me by the hand, and she walked out of the back door of the house through the garden and through the fence and started to walk without turning back, and nobody ran after her. And the rest I can tell you what happened after that. But the question is, if I ever thank my mother, the fact is that I said to my mother, Mom, you gave me birth twice. Once you gave me birth when you gave me birth, and the second time you gave me birth when you walked out through the back fence with me. Because the fact that they took the whole town to Auschwitz, every citizen in that town, they took to Auschwitz, and it so happens that I would have been for sure gassed and killed. So she gave me birth in 1939, and again on June 16, 1944, when she took me out of in the front door. Actually, I get into many details, so I let him ask you.
And how?
As he says, he has to rein me in.
Yes, I do. If you listen to the podcast, you will find that out quickly. How old were you when you had this conversation, when you thanked her, and what was her response?
I thanked her many times. I told her how terrific she was, because during the war, my mother was usually a delicate, sensitive person, but during the war, she was like a rock of Gibraltar. She saved us in other ways. There was starvation in Budapest when we were hiding there. That came much later. And my mother, who is was a very squeamish person, delicate person, she took a big kitchen knife, and there were dead horses in the street from bombardment. At that time, the Russians were bombarding Budapest. And my mother took a huge knife, and she cut pieces of the horses, because it was winter and there was snow. And so she felt that they were like in an ice box, and she cut pieces of
Just for context, because you're kind of throwing it out there, and some of the younger children and older, not children, students and adults. Forgive me, I have 3 young kids. So this was when Yugoslavia was liberated, correct?
This was before Yugoslavia was liberated.
Before, and they were hiding.
No, Yugoslavia was already liberated, but Budapest. Let's go sequentially.
We will, but just what she was talking about was when the Russians liberated Hungary, and there were bombs coming in from the Russians, and horses were killed in the street, and they were still in hiding. They had nothing to eat.
And the shelling from
so they would run out, and my grandmother would have to literally cut a piece of the horse off to cook it.
Not to mention that it's not kosher.
But back to sequential order. So not to mention it's not kosher. Yeah. So back to, so you run through this hole in the fence, and you're like 4.5 years old.
Yes.
I have a 2-year-old, almost 3, a 6-year-old, and almost 8-year-old. So it's hard to imagine someone younger than my middle child at that age doing this, but she ran with her mother, and your mother takes you to a Catholic school.
My mother just keeps walking. And in this town where we lived, my father had an eyeglass store. He was an optometrist, and he worked with a Gentile eye doctor. And the eye doctor was like a righteous Gentile. And he said to my father, when all this was heating up, If I can help you with anything, you can count on me. And my mother, without thinking much, because she was in a desperate state and she was horrified that she would be recognized because of the smallness of the town, and they lived there forever. She just walked with me. It was luckily early in the morning. Nobody recognized us. We got to this eye doctor's house. He saw us. We rang the bell. He opened the door and he saw us and he let us in.
What was his name?
Dr. Scherzer, Ivor Scherzer.
And I think that's important. There's foundation. I know there's a foundation in New York. You know, it wasn't just the Jews trying to save themselves. There were a lot of righteous, as they call them,
It was
Gentiles.
impossible to survive without the help of righteous people.
So it wasn't all evil.
No.
A lot of evil, but not all evil.
No.
So
No.
Carm likes to talk, and so do I. We've got to, and if someone can just give me like a 5 or 10 minute before, so we can speed it along. But so the eyeglass optometrist helps you, and you get, what's the name of this?
Eye doctor
What's the name of-
ophthalmologist.
And he takes you, your mother. or
No,
he
no,
takes you
my,
to your Catholic school.
there is a really, I have to say this, even if I don't tell you anything else about my survival, I have to tell you. So here are my mother and I, we are at this eye doctor. And he says, I am the benefactor of some nuns, a nunnery. It's a boys' school. And there were no phones. So I am going to walk over there and I ask them if they will accept you and tell them the truth, who you are and the dangers, because if they catch them, they kill them. And he went over there and the nun said, we'll take her. But we want you to bring her in the dark because we don't want, you to be recognized. Wait till the evening. In the meantime, my mother, this is the story that I want to tell you, because I'm very proud of my grandmother. May she rest in peace. She was my favorite person in the world. So my grandmother is now in the house, and she's there with my grandfather and my father, and they take them all. They don't notice that we are missing. They take them all to the cattle, where the merchandise train station is, the freight station. And my grandmother is there, and she's sitting on a suitcase. And she knows that my mother, with whom she was very close, her only daughter, is now with me. And she knows that we are going to this Dr. Scherzer because they talked about it. Suddenly a siren goes off, unrelated to all this. She's sitting on her suitcase. They separate the men and the women. So she's sitting there with another woman that she hardly knows from the community. And suddenly a siren goes off and my grandmother says to the woman next to her, grabs her and she says, let's run. And the two of them stand up and start to run to the first house at near the station. They go into the yard of this house because there were big doors where the horse buggies could go into backyards. That was the architecture. So she runs inside with this other woman. And there is a woman standing at the door with her arms folded and watching. I heard this, my grandmother and that other woman tell this story many times. I wasn't there, but they are standing there. The woman is standing in the doorway, leaning on the doorpost, and suddenly two soldiers run towards her from the freight station while they're waiting for the train for Auschwitz, and says, "Did you see two women run by?" And this woman at the door says, "Yes, I saw the woman running," and shows the opposite direction. So the two soldiers start to run that way. My grandmother and the woman come out. My grandmother walks over to this Dr. Scherzer's house and reunites with my mother. Okay?
She could have been shot on the spot.
She could have been shot or betrayed by this woman. Again, another person saved her.
Now, you show up at this Catholic school. I know grew up in a very Jewish household in New Jersey, and in the middle of our living room, we always had a picture of a nun, and it was always a little peculiar to me. And that's kind of how this all started, I think, because one day I said, how come we have a picture of a nun with a cross? And for many years, until she passed away, my mother would donate to her.
No, not
her-
I, my mother.
Your mother.
Yeah, my-
But what was her name, the nun, and what did she do with you?
The Mother Superior was called Matilda Gorichanets. And according to all what I remember in the description, she was a very unusual nun. She loved to sing and play the piano, and she loved beauty, and she loved people. And she told all the nuns that they should know, they knew the truth, but they should know that I'm her relative, a refugee from Croatia. She was from Croatia, and that I was sent to her to take care of me. And I was there, and I learned all the ways of the nuns while I was there. And I lived in the nunnery with them, their lifestyle, and they were very austere, except for the superior, who was like a personality warm. But she assigned me to a very quiet, sweet nun to take care of me completely. And then after about 6 months, my mother, who was at this point hiding in Budapest, the night they dropped me off in the nunnery, they went up to Budapest by train because there was no border. It's only a 2-hour distance from my town, Subotica, to Budapest. So they took a train up there, and they had the relatives who gave them the false documents, who bought for them the false documents. And they used those false documents once they got there, because otherwise they would have had to wear a yellow star, and they would have been taken again to a concentration camp. So they were using these documents, and they were not Jewish according to these documents. And then
Let me stop you for 1 sec. So you're literally 4.5 years old,
4.5.
turning 5.
And this comes the most unbelievable part.
What would you, I'm curious because I don't know the answer to this. I mean, when you would go to sleep and you're separated from your mother, because I see how close my kids are with their mother and my wife, what would you tell yourself in your head? About where your mother was? How were you able to stay calm?
The eye doctor and my mother told me that the night that she dropped me off, I was 2 months before my 5th birthday, and I screamed at the top of my lungs that a mother who loves her children doesn't leave her with strangers. So this is like one of those
Dropping Jewish guilt.
But I kind of just, I don't know, I guess I was into survival. They were nice to me. I learned all the prayers, all the ways of the nuns, and I just that was my life. But my mother had a connection with somebody who could help out because he worked for the railways. And after a while, my mother was missing me terribly. And she just couldn't deal with it anymore. And she took the risk of asking this man, also not Jewish, because no Jews were around anymore. Some were in hiding, but most of them were already in concentration camps from Budapest. And she asked this man to bring me up to Budapest, the 2-hour train trip from the nuns. But the irony of life is that I went kind of from what the vernacular is, from the frying pan into the fire, because just then the Russians began very heavy bombardments of Budapest, and it was very dangerous. So there were these long apartment buildings, like 8-story high, and there were all these real Hungarians, not Jewish, living there, and they all took one bed into the huge basement under the building because they wanted to be safe during the night when there were bombardments. And my mother and I and two other people would sleep in this, two other relatives would sleep in this one bed for 4 people, a single bed. And I was like a little bit weird. I wouldn't talk. I was like overly polite from a big mouth because I was the only grandchild. So I was getting a lot of attention before the war. And suddenly I was like this real mousy little quiet girl. And I was pale, I was sickly looking, I had a sty. When we came back, I had lice. It was pretty big mess.
During your time in the Catholic school, did you have any contact with like the outside
No,
world or with your
no,
mother?
None.
Did you ever think that she was coming back?
I don't know what I thought. I don't remember anymore, but I know what I thought when she left me there. But when I went back, I was very withdrawn. I wasn't like huggy kissy, I just wasn't.
What did people, because at that age, you don't really know, what's happening. I tried to explain Corona, for example, to my kids, and they get it on some level, but how did people try to explain what was happening to you? Do you remember?
After the war?
When you reunited
Oh,
with
by
your
the
mother?
way, this is really unbelievable. It sounds like a fantasy, but I knew who I was the whole time. I knew my identity. I knew I had a Jewish father. I knew I had a Jewish mother, grandmother, grandfather. I knew I was Jewish, but when I got to Budapest and hiding in the basement, I always they swear to me, the relatives we were with, I never made one mistake. I always called everybody by their fake names from the fake documents. In other words, I did not slip up and called my mother, mother. I would call her Madame Aranka Neni. It means Auntie Aranka. That was how I called her. So.
And did you have a fake name?
Yes, the priest did a conversion on me in the nunnery. I guess the nuns asked him to, and my name was Anna. But the other thing I did in the basement, which even I have to say, it sounds very modest, but I'm amazed after all these years. I would kneel down every night next to the bed where we slept, the 4 of us in the basement, because there were many people who were trying to hide, and the Christian Hungarians are very suspicious, and they didn't know suddenly all these people popped up. But because I said the prayers in a very loud voice every single night, they realized that I must be a Gentile if I know all these prayers. And I, on the other hand, 100% knew that I was Jewish, but I was doing this for this purpose. At that time, I was 5.5. Anyway, so then the Russians came to liberate Budapest. They came and they were like already fighting the Germans together with the Americans, by the way. For 5 years, they had no, you know how when somebody went to Afghanistan, they could come back home and regroup and then go back. They did it straight they were like wild. They came in, they shot people, they raped people. It was very scary when the Russians arrived. And what my mother did, because we were from a part of Yugoslavia, right on the Hungarian border, she spoke Serbian. She spoke Hungarian. When we were in Budapest, we spoke Hungarian. When the Russians came, she started to talk to them in Serbian. And the reason she talked to the Russians in Serbian is because it's another Slavic language, similar, not like Russian, but similar to Russian. And she told them who we were in Serbian. And they raped women, they murdered the Hungarians. They hated the Hungarians because they put up they worked with the Nazis. The Hungarians were part of Hitler's axis. So my mother saved us again by having this idea of talking to them. And then once they knew that we weren't Hungarian, they treated us very well. But then the problem started that there was no food in Budapest. It was now March. And we heard that there was food where we are from, in Subotica. It's in a very wealthy area of the what once used to be the Pannonian Sea, and it's a very wealthy agricultural area. There was food there, even at that moment. So we decided we are going there. And a 2-hour trip took us 2 full weeks to get. We were 6 women. I mean, I was the little woman, but the 6 of us were all women. And we were, at one point, we were, things were stolen from us. We were on a truck and so on. And finally, we got to our hometown. And we were treated very nicely.
One of my mother's trademarks on the podcast is every time we need to wrap, that's when she starts going. And we've got about 2 minutes left. I was given the 5-minute signal a few minutes ago. So I want to get to this, and it's really sad, but I'm curious. So when did you find out your father didn't make it? And I know you were really close to him. What would you remember what you felt at that moment?
I don't want to be melodramatic, but I still feel the same thing in a different, maybe more grown-up form. I feel definitely I lost out by not having a father.
You got cheated in life.
I didn't say cheated.
What was interesting and what she laughs about is, and we try to find humor, especially my mother,
I believe in black humor.
not me as much, but her father was Lotzi, and then she had a stepfather. Her mother remarried another man named Lotzi.
Who was Jewish and whose pregnant wife was gassed in Auschwitz with another child.
And I always thought the American spelling was Latzi. So when I had my middle daughter, I named her Zizi. That's her name, Zizi for the 2 Lotzis. And then later on, she told me it was Latci. So my daughter has sort of an incorrect name with good intentions,
But
and she laughs. She can't handle that I named my daughter after her 2 fathers, so she laughs when she hears the name. But
my stepfather was a wonderful man.
yeah,
I have a sister with my stepfather.
we are right on the mark. This is usually when Karmela has one more thing to add. Anything to add
No,
real
please
quick?
ask me questions because we were discombobulated.
I just want to say that every time she speaks, I learn something new, which I think is true for all of us when we hear these stories. So I think it's important to tell these stories again and again. There's always a new nugget of information in there that can continue to live on. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Steer, I believe.
We're not really done. We just want to shift and make sure that we have an opportunity for everybody in the audience to ask questions. So don't go anywhere, but there are these 2 audience mics. And we really hope that you have some questions, something that you're curious about for Joel and Karmela. Don't be shy.
Please come up. One thing I'm going to get yelled at from my mother for this for sure. She said, wait until the end for this, but your ticket today is, and I know in class, you're not supposed to get on your cell phones. Please get on your cell phone, go to YouTube and subscribe to Surviving the Survivor. The more people who subscribe, the more ways we can get the word out. So please do that. Put it on your school chats and all that.
We have about 50 episodes,
about
50.
about
I'm
50
becoming a real
episodes.
professional now.
We had a nice Jewish astrophysicist from Harvard last week, very famous
Dr.
scientist.
Avi Loeb, if you heard about the extraterrestrials.
He believes in aliens.
He was on our
Interesting
podcast.
episode. So please come up with questions if you have any. Don't be shy. I see someone there.
Okay.
I'll be up here. I'll just translate the question for the Zoom audience at home.
Hello.
Here?
Oh, sorry. Hi, my name is Zachary Stengel. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys, and thank you so much for giving us your time. My question is for Karmela, because given all that you've gone through, given all your experiences, it seems to me you have a great relationship with your son. It seems extremely loving, and it's apparent to me that you have grandchildren and just an amazing family. So given everything that you've gone through, how do you live such a happy life? Because you seem like a very happy person. And so I'm sure everyone is curious to see, how do you have such a positive attitude and come here and present to us?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks
absolutely.
a lot
I give her plenty of aggravation, don't worry.
Yeah, my husband of 60 odd years, maybe the secret is that I married a psychiatrist. You know,
There has not been one day in 60 years, and my dad will confirm this, where she has not yelled at my father.
He's a very even tempered, but I think I don't know if it's genetic. Because I didn't go into details, but I think his optimism killed my father. I have a story about that, but a little story I can tell you if I don't want to waste too much time now, but I'll tell you that story. My father arrived to Auschwitz with the other people from the town. They separated the men and the women. He was with men who bore witness, written witness. My father studied in Germany before World War II. He went over to the officer when he got off the plane and he said, I learned in Germany how to chisel eyeglasses. I have a very useful profession. Maybe you can use my expertise. And immediately they put him in there were two lanes. One was for the gas chambers and one was for forced labor. And the guy said, immediately put him in the gas chamber. When my mother's father, my grandfather, saw that he was here, he didn't know it was the gas chamber. He stepped over there with him. Both of them were put into the gas chamber because he was such an optimist that even in 1944, he thought that he could, just by telling what he can do for them, they will keep him alive. That will keep him alive. So optimism, I don't know. I'm blessed. Blessed. This is the new cliche, the word blessed, but I'm really blessed.
And I picked up the
Because
negative.
I have 8 grandchildren.
Sure.
So it was mentioned that you got your master's degree in social work and then you went on to become a marriage therapist. I'm curious if anything in your life inspired those decisions and why you chose to get your master's in social work. My mother's a social worker, so I find it fascinating.
I used to joke, I would say, I was a social worker before even in high school. And then I went to my 50th high school reunion and I listened to my friends, how they perceived me and so forth. And they said, you were always minding everybody's business. You were always trying to help people. You were always putting your nose very down, So
And that has not changed at all.
No, it hasn't changed at all. So I think that's one of the things is that I'm truly a people person and I find people fantastic.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hey, this is a question for Karmela. I'm very curious about your perception as a child. I think you mentioned you were born in 1938.
39.
39. Okay, so I'm very curious because we're studying political violence and the repression that some regimes use. So I'm really curious. I don't like bringing him up, but I'm curious about your perception as a child about Adolf Hitler and his tactics. And how did you feel when you heard that name as a child? Like, what emotions did it bring into you, and how do you feel about Nazi Germany?
Listen, I was born in 1939. The war started really already in 39. He occupied and was on the go. Already Kristallnacht, when he really destroyed all the Jewish stores and killed Jews, was already behind us. I was just born. I mean, we humans don't begin to be. I really began to understand it when they put us in the ghetto. I realized we had to leave our house and we had to go there, but it wasn't a horrendous thing for me because I was a child. I was surrounded by my mother, grandmother, grandfather, and father. And I did not have any kind of political experience because you see the people who lived through that as young adults or adults, they are all dead. Really, I mean, they're 90s and 95, 100-year-old, they're not around anymore. So just late, when I was younger, when I was in my 50s or 40s, I did not want to be defined by the Holocaust. I truly didn't, and I wasn't. But now I'm totally like I'm a very hot commodity now, you know. Everybody's wants to hear the stories because we are dying out at this in a tremendous speed.
And one story is crazier than the other. Just to address what you're saying, I interviewed her two best friends, maybe in 2000.
It's when I was
It's
65.
still somewhere on, it exists on.
No,
YouTube.
it's on YouTube.
One passed away. The other one, I mean, they both grew up in Poland and it was actually much worse. And one of them, correct me if I'm wrong, spent a lot of time hiding in a cemetery and like
In a crypt.
they had like a coffin that she would go into. And when you speak to them and you ask them about their childhood, they're like, oh, it was great. It was fun. You know, it was like, oh, I didn't know any better.
No, one of them is
Which-
my roommate from college is an architect, and she builds the most beautiful, beautiful buildings.
I know Dr. Steer's looking at his watch, but we'll take the next question.
Thank you for being here and thank you for sharing your experience.
You're welcome.
As a young child, when the Nazis came in your home and take your father away, I know that probably as scary as the situation itself, the confusion of it is probably just as terrifying. You said you had no real political affiliation, or, I mean, you were young, so probably not. So were you more afraid? Were you confused about what was happening? Did you know exactly what was happening? And were you more afraid about what would happen to your father? Or were you more afraid that you were probably facing the certainty of death yourself?
I truly was too young to feel any of those completely. Instinctively, I did not feel security. I felt a certain insecurity for sure. And I think I became numb. I think the way I dealt with it, that's my thought about it when I think about it. I think I became numb. You know, numb, no feeling, nothing goes in, nothing bothers you. But then you become like almost like what my mother was very worried about, like very flat affect, no, you know, no yelling, no, like a child, no laughing, no jumping, no. That was my reaction, like becoming almost like out of it a little, and didn't look healthy and wasn't healthy.
Right.
But I became, when I went back to our hometown, many other children, non-Jewish children, had their fathers killed during the war. So I wasn't like a unique person with an orphan with no father. I was almost like, oh, another one of these, because there were so many that lost their fathers in this town. And
Thank
all
you.
of Europe, you know, all of Europe.
Thank you.
Well, why don't you go first and then.
Yeah, this is for Karmela. You mentioned that throughout this all, you were very young, but you were able to keep that identity. You knew who you are, even though you prayed these prayers that weren't your own. I was just curious, even though you were young throughout this time, did you find it hard to like keep on to that Jewish faith that you had, or was that something more prevalent that was sort of pushing you on?
Well, my family, my mother was, what should I say? She had faith. She was a very deeply religious person, not observing all the, you know, rituals to the T, but she truly, until the day she died at 97 and a half, she always said, I trust in God, God will take care of it, God. And that came through. My mother's father was a teacher by profession, and he taught in the Jewish school. In other words, in the secular school in our town, that the Christian children learned catechism, the Jewish children learned Judaism. And my grandfather's job was to teach in this school before the war. So our identity was very clearly defined. And don't forget, it was going on. I have to say this one more thing. Where are we?
Carm, I give you permission. Go ahead.
I always have to say one more thing, Mom. Our identities were very, very strong, and even after the war, when I began to understand what happened to us, I think my Jewish identity became stronger because I felt I didn't choose to be Jewish. I was born into this particular family. I could have been born into your family later or earlier, but I was born into this family. And now for that reason, we had to go through all this. I am going to be a proud Jew and a strong Jew, not a weak and cowering Jew. That's how I felt. That was my identity after the war. But during the war, I was a mess.
Thank you.
Next question.
I'm really curious about this. What was the attitude, the morale of like your family in Europe after the war? And how does this like morale attitude sort of, I guess I would imagine like how people changed after the war. How does this compare to when you came to America, like America versus Europe and their attitudes and thoughts on the war?
Yeah. What I'm going to say is not nice, okay? But I never said this before in my life, and maybe I'm politically not correct to say this, but I feel that Europe has like at least an inch of Jewish blood in its soil. There were so many massacres through the centuries of Jews, and there was such mistreatment through the centuries of the Jews of Europe. And I always felt that America was clean. You know, when I arrived in 1961, when I married my husband, and he was born in New York, so he's out of that European thing. And I don't know if I answered your question.
Kind of. I'm very sorry. It's just I'm really curious. Like, what did people think about the war? You know, like.
Well, many emigrated to Israel. By the way, the number was not completely correct, and it's not, Mr. President, it's not your fault. But the number is the numbers of Subotica were a little different. More people came back. Today there are 80 people, 80 Jews, but at one point, these people emigrated to Israel, and we were ready to emigrate. And then my mother got pregnant with my sister, and then a war broke out in Israel, and one thing led to the other. We stayed there, and my stepfather's family was there. It was all personal, private little stories that we stayed there, but many people left. Many people left.
Thank you.
So my question is for Karmela. I believe your son mentioned that he didn't really start taking an interest in the family history and like what you had gone through until he was about college age or perhaps out of there. What was your reaction when he started to take that interest and when he started to really ask questions that you were maybe uncomfortable with?
Well, I think that he is now almost like taking, you know, when you were relay racing, you know, he's taking the, what is it? The baton. I have the feeling that it's a mystery to me too. Like I joke with him and I say, it does more for your identity than it does for my identity. You know, like he really takes it. I think Joel is much more, lets his emotions. Joel is much more of an emotional person than I am.
I don't want to make it about me, but I will for a moment. I mean, it is, you know,
the joke on the.
There's definitely an added burden, and it's something. It's very.
Children of Survivor. There are books and books.
I see it in this perspective, but then more often than not, I see it almost like an outer body experience. Not to get crazy or hokey, but almost like from above. Like I'm not really part of it. It's too hard for me to process what really happened. And I think I'm still in that stage right now. And I don't think I ever will, to be honest, but I'm certainly much more aware. And our podcast is called Surviving the Survivor. And one of the reasons is obviously having to do with the Holocaust. The others, when not all survivors, but my mother is a very, as you can tell, takes no SH, you know what. She's a very tough woman. Unfortunately, that trickles down to her son. So I deal with that on a daily basis. And so I'm trying to survive that part of it as well. But
We also have a daughter.
and we do have a sister and a daughter, but she's a real example of strength, and the old saying that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. There's no better example than my mother. And she's one person out of many survivors, but if you can cling on to one story, as I say in news, it kind of brings it home. It makes it emotional and personal. And so I just hope you guys carry on my mom's story.
And I have to tell you just
This is
one
it.
more.
This happens every
This
time on a
is typical.
podcast.
I have
Yeah.
to say this. In
Yeah.
whole fairness, if you were from Poland during the war, your Holocaust experiences are so much more horrific and lasted for so much longer. The Hungarian Jews were hit only towards the very end, when the Germans already knew that they were being slowly defeated, and this was their last hooray. Like my father was killed 3 months before our town was liberated. To make the long story short, my example is like Holocaust light compared to what others went through. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Karmela and Joel Waldman. I really think that you touched everyone here with your stories. And Karmela, you really did pass the torch to your son, and it was a remarkable opportunity to have you both here with us
Thank
today.
you.
Before I forget, I do want to say that today we're talking to survivors and their children, not just now, but also this afternoon at 4 o'clock. The next event in our series is an interview with Ivan Wilzig about his father, Siggy Wilzig's biography. That's 4 p.m. on Zoom. You can find it on the website. I'm now going to invite those participating in the candle lighting ceremony to come forward and take their places behind the table while I speak. The capacity to make fire is a unique and widespread human trait, both functional and symbolic. In Jewish tradition, lighting a flame can be celebratory or somber, from Hanukkah lamps to yahrzeit candles lit in memory of the deceased on the anniversaries of their deaths. We have a special relationship to these flames. It says in Proverbs, the candle of God is the soul of man. Perhaps this is one reason why flames always reach to the heavens. Fire has a particular association with the Holocaust, not only due to the way so many of its victims' corpses were destroyed, denying them a proper burial, but also because the very word Holocaust derives from the Greek translation of the biblical whole burnt offering. It's become customary at Holocaust commemoration ceremonies worldwide for distinguished guests to participate by lighting 6 candles in memory of the 6 million Jews and many others murdered in the Holocaust. Today, we take the 6 candles we light to symbolize the collective desire to reach beyond suffering and difference to a world of peace, hope, and healing. May these flames shine the way from remembrance to hope and illuminate the darkness of the past with the light of education and awareness. So I will first invite Interim President Jessel to light the first candle. I invite now Karmela and Joel Waldman to light the second candle.
You light it. Light it, okay, you do it. Because you steady. Just click it. Click it.
No, you do. I'm not technical.
Whoops. Oh, th-
They're not technical people.
This is not lighting.
Mommy.
Oh, there.
Okay.
Vicky David for the third candle. Danny Vasquez Taro for the fourth candle.
I didn't know we were lighting a candle. No. Oh, we did. Did not know we were-
Gabriel Garvey, Hillel president for the fifth candle. And last but not least, it's my honor to welcome Consul General of Israel in Miami, Maor Elbaz Starinsky, to light the sixth candle.
That's why we have
I've
to-
interviewed him before. That's your box right next to me. Mhm.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming. Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming.
You may take your seats.
Oh. We lived in Israel for a while.
Good afternoon. My name is Rabbi Beryl Gorelick from Chabad-FIU. Different cultures have different ways of honoring those who have passed away. In Judaism, we do that through prayer and good deeds. I will recite a prayer honoring the souls of those who were killed in the Holocaust, and I encourage each of you to think of something special you can do. Give some extra charity, help out a friend, something to honor those special people. I will now recite the prayer. If you are able to stand, please rise. El Malay Rachamim, Sheikhem Amarimim, Hamse Menucha Nachen al Kanfe Ashkenu, Bamailas Kadoshim Mutahirim, Kizer Harakia, Mazhirim Asnishmas Achenu Bnei Yisrael Hakdoshim Vatahirim, Shenoflu Bidei Reitzchim Nishbach Domim Ba Auschwitz, Maidanek, Treblinka, Ubashar Machnes Hashmad Beirapa, Shenerigu, Shenishkatu, Vishanishserfu, Vishanitbu, Vishanechniku al Kiddush Hashem. Bavur Shakol Hakol HaKadosh Hazem Ispalim Badas Kars Nishmoisam, Began Eden Tehiminu Chasam, Lachin Balarachimim, Yastirim Besesik Hanafechel Eilamim, B'tzur Achaim Esnishmoisam, Hashem Hu Nachalosam Be'anucham Mishkabesam B'Shalom, B'Neimar, Amen. O God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant true rest upon the wings of the Shekhinah in the exalted spheres of the holy and pure, to all the souls of our holy and pure brethren whose blood was spilt by the murderers in Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Sobibor, Treblinka, and the other extermination camps in Europe, who were killed, strangled, burned, and buried alive for the sanctification of your name, for whose souls we now pray. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. May the All-Merciful One shelter them in the cover of his wings for eternity, and may he bind their souls in the bond of life. Hashem is their heritage, and may they rest in peace in their resting places. Now let us say, Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Gorelick. And thank you, Interim President Jessel, Karmela and Joel Watson, and everyone here for this ceremony. My name is Alexander Sutton, and I'm a member of the Student Government Association, where I serve as a SIPA senator and the chair of the Appropriations Committee. I'm also a student of Professor Araras's course on political violence and revolution. Thank you again, Professor, for bringing all of us. As a representative and a member of the student body, I have seen firsthand the difference that anti-hatred education makes in changing people's mindsets. In high school, I was part of an interfaith youth group where students of diverse religious beliefs would come together each month to share their faith. Over the course of the 2 years that I was a part of it, I personally learned more than I could have ever imagined about others' faiths, traditions, and histories. I saw tremendous growth in myself and all the participants of the program as we expanded our knowledge of religion, culture, and history. My senior year, the group made an expedition right here to FIU to experience a Holocaust learning lab hosted by the one, the only Oren Steer himself. Those 1 or 2 hours are some of the most unforgettable memories I have, and I could tell the other students felt the same. Seeing the atrocities perpetrated against Jews, atrocities fueled by hate, and realizing that the oppression of the Jewish people had roots going back not just to the Holocaust, but to millennia ago, strengthened my resolve to educate my peers and make them more conscientious members of society. One individual by one, we can build a society that is more compassionate, understanding, and conscious of the horrors of the past so as to not repeat them again. When students take time to learn about the atrocities of the past, not only do they learn how to prevent those atrocities again, but they improve the future of our world and the future of our university. And nothing is more important than that in this period of leadership transition, a period through which I believe FIU will advance, not in spite of the transition, but because our new leadership will continue to strive to keep our campus hate-free. Even in the face of uncertainty, the future of FIU has never looked brighter. And our efforts to eradicate anti-Semitism and all forms of hate will only get stronger. In August, the Student Government Association passed a resolution condemning anti-Semitism in the strongest terms and advocating for the continuance of programs like this, which educate the student body and our FIU community on how to learn from the past to build a better future. But resolutions and declarations are not enough. It rests on the shoulders of every Panther to have those one-on-one conversations with our peers that educate each other and ensure that the atrocities of the Holocaust are never forgotten. This is truly the only way to forge a better FIU, a better country, and a better world. Thank you again to FIU's interim president, Kenneth Jessel, our keynote speakers, Karmela and Joel Waldman, and everyone that participated in the candle lighting ceremony. Thank you to the program's co-sponsors, the FIU Office of the President, the Honors College, the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs, the Dorothea Green Lecture Series, and the Department of Politics and International Relations. Tomorrow is the last day of Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Week. Join us at noon for a discussion on the new anti-Semitism in Europe, Latin America, and the US, and at 5 p.m. for Shabbat of the Living, both via Zoom. Thank you and have a great afternoon.